Hello, everyone. This is Jacob Popio, the producer of The Apex, and this episode, Jan interviews Jasz Rae Joseph on what it's like being a young woman in entrepreneurship, advice on self awareness, and why you don't need to be a morning person to be productive. Jasz is the founder of Jasz Rae Digital, a marketing consulting firm focused on helping service based businesses achieve their goals. If you want to support us, there are three ways to do so. One is to donate to our cause at www.patreon.com/the Apex Podcast. Second, visit our merch line that is proudly partnered with Envision Clothing Company at envisionclothingcompany.com. The final one is completely free. All we ask is if you learn something from this episode or know someone that needs to hear our message, share it with them. Please subscribe and hope this pushes you toward your apex.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Apex Podcast. My name is Jan Almasy, and as always, we are going to be bringing another guest to the table with some awesome information, and we're going to be kicking off a new segment today. So I'm super excited for this next little series that we're going to go on because it's going to kind of chronicle a journey that I just recently went on myself through a course called Indie Collective. Okay, so this course, I met a lot of the guests that you're going to be hearing over the next month or two, and they are all ballers. Ballers. Okay, so like these people getting into this course, the network that I was able to acquire is just absolutely off the charts. One of the people that we're going to be talking to today to kick everything off was born and raised in Pittsburgh, moved to Northeast Ohio, which is when I kind of met her, and then is now in, I believe, Houston. And if she will correct me when she comes on, then she will. But I'm pretty sure that that's where she's at. She's nodding her head, so I got that right. So I would like to welcome to the Apex Podcast, Miss Jasz Rae Joseph. How's it going?
Hello, it is great. I'm excited to be here.
I know I'm super excited to have you. So why don't we just start? I always like to kind of start things off with just who you are. Obviously, I kind of talked about you were born and raised in Pittsburgh, but let's introduce the world to Jasz.
Yes, definitely. Born and raised in Pittsburgh. Don't hold that against me. Lots of Northeast Ohio people will. Um, yes, and then moved to Northeast Ohio, went to college at Baldwin Wallace University. Really, started my career path there, had a ton of internships in college, figured out that marketing was the place for me. And then never left, got a job out of college, hung around for a while, made a huge network there, and just recently, like you mentioned, moved to Houston, Texas. So kind of starting over, building a new network here. But as I'm sure everybody knows, and I'm sure we will cover, with COVID, the world has just become so remote and so amazing in that way that it doesn't even matter where I'm located. You can have your network is now global, national. So that's a really awesome piece too of my story and everybody's story during this crazy time.
Yeah, and then so just for everybody's reference while they're listening, how old are you, Jess?
I am 25 years old.
25 years young. Love that. Well, I always like to do that because a lot of times I'll have people on the show and then people will reach out to me afterwards and be like, "Hey, like, that was so awesome. They must have been in their careers for so long." I'm like, "No, actually, it was like 24 years old."
Oh my gosh, it's
You
so
know?
funny you say that. I like cringe when I say it because I hate saying it because I feel like it devalues me immediately,
Mm.
which is like this horrible thing that I'm like constantly battling. But yes, it's so cringy. 25.
Yeah. Well, it can feel like that too, if you are a
Yes.
younger entrepreneur and hopefully, with the way that we put this out and the people that we promote to, will be some other people inside of our demographics. I just turned 26 2 days ago.
Yeah,
So I'm like
definitely.
right in the same boat. And so I would love, obviously, the title of the show that we selected was Shattering Stereotypes Through Self Awareness.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're going to be diving into some of those topics. We'll probably dive into, like you said, remote work and the move and everything like that. But if you are a younger entrepreneur or somebody that is inside of the 9 to 5 and feels a little bit disconnected or not really sure where you want to go or where you fit in, this episode is going to be for you.
Definitely. Yes.
So I would like to kind of start off with just defining some things, right? Like we're going to dive into this whole idea of self-awareness. So to you, What does self-awareness mean?
Yes. So to me, self-awareness is a journey. It's almost like I like to think of self-awareness and happiness as very similar concepts because it's not something that you ever fully achieve. You're never like, I am happy, I am
Hmm.
self-aware. It's this journey that you're constantly on and you're constantly getting closer to it. But self-awareness is so important in the business world, whether you're an entrepreneur or not. And to me, self-awareness is knowing your strengths, but also knowing your weaknesses.
Mm.
And more importantly, owning your weaknesses, not
Ooh, I love
avoiding
that.
them, not hiding from them, but leveraging them for increased success.
Now, so that's interesting. Now, when you say like, what would you say is the difference between understanding your weaknesses and owning them?
Yes. So, understanding your weaknesses is saying, I am bad at X. And a lot of people will then try to become good at X. And, I don't necessarily think that that's the right approach. I
Mm.
think that when you can own your weaknesses and you can either A, add people to your team, add people to your network that bring those that kind of are the yin to your yang, that are good at the things that you're not good at. I am a strong believer that we are better together.
Mm.
Nobody gets to success on their own. That's just a fact. So that's a big piece of it. And then another big piece of it too is being relatable. So many of the most powerful conversations that I've had in the business world, in the entrepreneur world, have been these incredibly vulnerable conversations where
Mm.
you can sit down with somebody and say, I'm really bad at X. I have no idea how to approach X. And through that, you get to make these awesome connections. You get to make these awesome, you get to build your network in a much stronger way. And when I say network and when you say network, I'm not talking about the people that you're connected to on LinkedIn. I'm talking about the people that you could genuinely call on to help you from a personal and a business perspective. And so to me, self awareness is just all encompassing in that way.
I'm just going to keep rolling down this definition train because you're saying a bunch of interesting stuff here. So I love that differentiation between network because, I mean, if to everybody listening, if you've spent any time listening to the Apex podcast, or recently I've been just going ape on LinkedIn, writing posts and trying to post surveys and polls and all this other kind of stuff. Um, you know that I'm fascinated with the idea of like how our inner self talk and our psychology exists within this realm that social media has created. Like the definition between network. People think of network
Mhm.
as I have 1,000 connections on LinkedIn or I have 5,000 friends on Facebook and we have all this other kind of stuff. And we actually saw this transition happen probably about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago in like Instagram marketing, where people started switching and they were like, yeah, we don't care how many followers you have. We care how engaged they are.
Yeah,
And that was a big thing. That was a big switch for a lot of
huge.
people because they were paying for, to have 100,000 followers on their account, but then getting 100 likes per post. And
Yeah,
businesses started getting smart and they were like, how quality actually is your network? That's horrible grammar, but you get the point. So
100%.
so when
Yes.
you're thinking of network and like those people that you are able to reach out and call on and stuff like that. One of the things that we talked about in the pre-interview portion, kind of getting ready for the show was what it was like for you kind of entering the space after college as a young female in Northeast Ohio with a whole bunch of old white men in manufacturing.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So, like, how do you even go about building a network as a young female in Northeast Ohio, or just, just an entrepreneur in general, a younger person entering, not an entrepreneur at that point, but a young person entering the workforce? What are some ways that you went about kind of leveraging and owning your weaknesses, showcasing your strengths, and building that network up?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I am a strong believer that you can find common ground with just about anyone. So, to your point, I was working with these old white men in the manufacturing realm.
Which for
That is,
everybody listening is like 90% of Northeast Ohio. Like
yes.
that's definitely, if you're from the area, you'll understand where we're coming from. And if you're not, just trust us.
Yes, exactly. And on surface level, we seem as though we have nothing in common, right? But there's always something, and I think that's a huge piece of relationship building. again, whether you're in the corporate world, whether you're an entrepreneur, just getting ahead in your career is so much about relationship building and finding that common ground with people. So I was able to I make a point to start every one of my client calls with at least 10 minutes of not business talk. Hey, how was your weekend? And then I'll write things down, hey, how was that thing that you did last time? How are your kids? How is your wife? All these things so that you can start building these relationships and common ground with people. And you would be so shocked at how much you genuinely do have in common with people that you think that you have nothing in common with.
Mm.
So that was a huge piece of how I was able to get ahead with these people that, surface level, I had nothing in common with. But then the flip side of that, too, is finding your tribe and finding your people that you do have a ton in common with. Because while I was able to build these relationships with these, old manufacturing men, I certainly was not being extensively vulnerable with them. I was not having these conversations that I was just talking about with them where I was like, help, I have no idea what to do. I was
Mm.
having those conversations with a different group of people. Together Digital was huge for me. It's a network of women in digital careers. And getting connected with that and having that network was huge. That really opened me up to a larger kind of worldview and an idea of all the things that I could do with my career and with my life. So it's finding that balance between people that you genuinely do connect with and people that you can connect with.
Mm. That's, I think, is a very important distinction, because I feel like part of self awareness for me has been really just leaning into the fact that for years, I just realized that I had ADHD at like 23. Right?
Hmm.
Like my mom did not believe in meds. She's first generation immigrant from Slovakia, so like bless her heart, but like everything was like peppermint oil, and we lived on a farm. We made goat milk soap, so that we didn't
That's
get
incredible.
eczema, like all of these other types of things, right? But for the longest time it was just like, "Oh, you can't focus, just focus." And I was like, I don't think I can. Like, I don't know if you quite understand that, like, it's like physically painful for me to sit still and not be impulsive sometimes. Like, even right now, off screen, I'm doing this so I can
Yes.
talk to you, right? Um, and so, like, you start moving down that line, and I started realizing, man, I am fantastic at conversations. I am horrible at follow up because I
Yep.
forget, right? So, like, I started building out my Google Calendar and really being focused on scheduling and all these other types of things. And then I found Indie Collective, met a whole bunch of other high paced squirrels, and learned what they were doing to make sure that they were staying on track, which it sounds kind of like that Together Digital, is a support group, that
Yes.
tribe of people that kind of understands where you're from. And it took no effort for me. It actually added energy for me to connect with those people.
Yes.
Whereas the other people that I can connect with sometimes takes energy to connect with those people, and
I love that
having that
differentiation.
self-awareness and being able to understand that, I may be ADHD, which means that I seem like I'm an extrovert, but I'm actually introverted. So it takes energy for me to connect with people. I can, because I could sell a pork chop to a rabbi, I think, at this point. But it takes a lot of emotional energy and mental energy to do that. And then by the end of the day, I'm drained, and people don't understand that alone time is needed. So finding your tribe is exponentially important. One thing that I was really fascinated with when we were talking was about how important that networking was for you, and how it allowed you to get into client facing roles and getting to do what you actually really wanted to do, which was interact with clients and stuff like that. So I'm sure that there's people out there that are listening that are, stuck doing checklists, or really want to try to
Totally.
get into that role where they're getting to actually directly interact with clients. Why don't we talk a little bit about what that journey was like for you, kind of getting from that initial post grad and then getting to
Mhm.
that place where you were able to interact with clients on a regular basis?
Definitely, yes. So relationship building was absolutely huge for me in terms of, building my career trajectory and being able to get a seat at these boardroom tables at such a young age. And quite frankly, like, is a reason why, to our earlier conversation, why like I was always hiding my age, didn't want people to know, because I knew it wouldn't get me a seat at those tables. But what did get me a seat at those tables was building relationships and selling. At the end of the day, we, especially as entrepreneurs, love to talk about businesses in this like wonderful, like world saving light, where it is to a huge extent. But at the end of the day, everybody wants to make money. And
Yeah,
if
we all have
you
to eat.
can, yes, yes. And in making money and relationship building go hand in hand. People
Mm,
hire their friends, and most importantly, people do not fire their friends. And so, with all of that, I was able to build these awesome relationships with a lot of our clients that made selling so much easier for me because they then viewed me as a trusted resource as
mm.
opposed to a salesperson. I was selling them things that I genuinely knew would help their business and would help them grow. And they had enough trust in me to be able to say, yes, if Jasz recommends this, then, 100%, let's roll with it. And then through that, as I was generating more revenue, I was then brought into bigger and bigger meetings and allowed to sit at these tables with executives, soak it all in. And that really helped, my career skyrocket, quite frankly. It brought me to like senior level positions when I was only a few years out of college. And at the end of the day, helped me build my own business too. I took so much of what I learned in those high level meetings and in those, meetings that that entry level people just quite frankly don't get to be in, like the budgeting meetings and the hiring meetings. And all of that is so important when you're thinking about building a business. And it's more than just your job, but it's understanding the inner workings of the larger business.
There's so many different directions that I want to take that, but um, so that difference between trusted resource and salesperson, right?
Yes.
Like that is so critical. And that's something that I talk about all the time with like when I am talking to sales teams or I'm trying to, teach people how to interact with customers to provide higher revenues and, make bigger deals and all of those types of things. Generally, one of the first things that I talk about is maybe you don't try to sell them right away. Maybe God forbid, ask them how their kid's football game was, you know?
Yes,
Like you're exactly what you were
totally.
saying. Start 10 minutes. It's as easy as that. Take 10 minutes to just get to know them as a human before you start to access their pocketbook.
Yep.
Um, and then the other piece you were talking about, providing resources that you genuinely know will actually add value to the business. Um, Now I'm curious, how exactly would you go about understanding what would actually add value to that business? Because you mentioned something towards the end of that last monologue, which was basically understanding the whole picture and the big picture. What are some ways that you went about maybe kind of expanding your vision so that you could understand the big picture?
Yes. So understanding my clients on a deep, deep level is so important to me. I start every client relationship with assessments on assessments on assessments. We don't do any work until I deeply understand who your target audience is, your full competitor landscape, what we're looking at from a much larger picture, because that allows me to come in from so many different angles and pull in resources that are going to help my clients
Mm,
grow in a way that, quite frankly, I can't do if I don't have all of that information. There's no one size fits all. What works for some businesses will not work for other businesses. And until you have a deep understanding of the competitive landscape and of their business, there should be absolutely no selling that happens. You just have
mm,
to be a sponge for that first period. And that looks different in every different business. For my business, it's a month. I spend an entire month just being a sponge.
mm,
And then from there, we can dive in and actually start doing things.
right.
And with a lot of business owners, they want it fast. And you can't have it both ways. I had an old mentor that used to talk about this triangle, and you can have two, but you can't have all three. And it was good, fast, and cheap.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I think about that constantly, and I use that analogy constantly. And this is another, great example for it.
That is most definitely a products industry manufacturing like
Yes.
analogy for sure. Cause I've heard that plenty of times too. And coming like the careers being raised kind of in the same area. That makes a lot of sense. But I mean, it's also true. We
Mhm.
spend, like I was just telling you, we just are talking to a solar company
Yes.
out in Cali, and the first three meetings are basically just our executive team sitting down with their executive team and shooting the shit. Let's
Mhm.
figure out, what do you guys want to do? What's your vision? Where do you want to take the company, after just being in solar? Because we sat down and we had that first meeting already. And I found out that they don't want to stop at solar. They want to do automated lighting. They want to do all this other stuff, which completely changes the long term strategic objectives.
Totally.
Right. But I would have never found that out if I would have just said, if so, like, I'll give you two scenarios, right? Client comes up to say hello. Client says, I need X service. Agency says, we will provide X service. And then they provide X service. Client gets X service. And then that's it, right? Or client comes up, and this is something that's critical. Like if you're, listening to the podcast and you want to take away a little nugget, I'm going to write this clip down, right? Because client comes up, client says, I need X service. All you have to do is ask, why do you believe you need X service? Simple question, right? What drove you to believe that you need that? And then they'll start, talking about research and, my uncle's, cousin's friend's daughter that's in communication school told us that we need to run Google ads. The amount of times that I've heard some random recommendation from like a high school student to a business owner that they need to be running Google ads is obscene. And then they come in and it's like, no, like you don't need to spend that money right now. Like if you do this, then it'll raise this and you could do this. And it actually opens up that door for you to educate, which then allows you to become that trusted resource instead of a salesperson.
Absolutely. Yes.
That's something that I've really, I think, honed in on, and I think is a phenomenal piece of the process. So I love the fact that your discovery phase is a month long. I mean, like
Mhm.
that amount of time being able to sponge in will allow you to just hone in so intimately on what that business actually needs that by the time you start executing, it feels natural to both you and the client and the customer that's seeing all of the content coming out.
Yes. And that's a huge piece of it. It's not strictly for the customer, it's also for me.
Hmm.
It's so much more fun. It's so much easier for me to do work for a business that I deeply understand and can see the big picture of versus to your point, coming in and saying, "Okay, we're going to run Google ads." That that's not fun, that's not engaging,
No,
it's not gonna end well, quite frankly.
right.
So yes.
Especially now that Google is adding in, I don't know whether they have like 300 different parts of the algorithm now or something like that that you have to satisfy for ads and core vital. Yeah, well, that's a completely
Yes.
separate can of worms. We'll open that on
Crazy.
another day. Yeah. Okay. So we're in this kind of realm where we're establishing ourselves as a trusted resource. We're not selling to people right off the bat, and we're becoming more self-aware of our strengths and weaknesses, right? So
Yes.
what are some of the things about self-awareness? um Actually, you know what, I'm going to take that one step back before I ask that question. You at some point made the transition from work to independent work. Why don't
Yes.
we could talk about that transition, and then we can kind of dive into the pieces of self-awareness that drove you to make that decision.
Absolutely. Yeah, so they honestly go hand in hand.
Yeah.
I moved into independent work because of my self-awareness around my, quote unquote weaknesses, if that's what you want to call them. And for a long time, that's what I did call them. And I was very self-conscious around them.
Mhm.
And they might sound like funny and small to a lot of people, but one of my big ones was like, I am not a morning person at all. And again, like it sounds kind of funny, but like I'm not. I've never been a morning person. And there is this rhetoric around the early bird catches the worm, like successful people wake up at 4 a.m. and work out and like live their life.
Yeah, the
And
grind culture.
yes, and I was never into that. I was always late for work. I was fortunate to work for a company that was like that didn't really care and was like, "You're awesome," but I cared, and I was always like cringy when I was the last one in the office, and I always felt like I had to level up And whenever I started my business, even, there is this rhetoric around entrepreneurs and that hustle culture
Mm,
of if you're an entrepreneur, you have to love what you do and you have to be willing to work on your business 24/7. And there's like all of these Instagram entrepreneurs that are like hustle all day, every day, like no days off. And that was whenever I started my business, I was like, all right, like this is what I got to do. Like if I'm going to be a successful business owner, like I have to work so hard. And I remember joining Indie Collective and hearing these seasoned business owners say, I work 20 hours a week and I make seven figures. And I was like, whoa, I wasn't like, whoa, that you're doing that. I was like, whoa, you're admitting that. Like, what a crazy concept. Like, I would never tell anyone that I worked 15 hours a week. Like, don't people think that you're a slacker? Like, all of these stereotypes, quite frankly, were just like running through my head around the visibility around that, not
mm,
the realisticness, I don't think that's a word, of it. And so that was a huge turning point for me to be able to own the fact that like I don't want to be a part of the hustle culture. The hustle culture doesn't work for me. When I work crazy hours, I'm not my best self. When I don't sleep in, I'm not my best self. And being able to optimize this life that fits me, that fits my business, and most importantly, that I have confidence around.
mm, mm. I it's crazy. I was just talking to somebody else the other day about the Instagram entrepreneurs. There's a buddy of mine named Jared Dreschel, and he's traveling the country right now. And he started a YouTube channel called Soul of Jarrett, right? And it's basically
Mhm.
like mindfulness. He talks a lot about Ram Dass and like Terrence McKenna and um, just a lot of mindfulness culture. Like Catherine Zach would absolutely love him. And
Awesome.
that's a little hint, pay attention to that name because it'll show up later. Um, but it's entrepreneurs can tell the difference between a real entrepreneur and an Instagram entrepreneur.
Totally.
Like
Yes.
blatantly. I'm like, I look at some of these people, like I remember when Clubhouse first came out, and there's people that
Mhm.
would just constantly pop up in my feed all the time, like inviting me into rooms. I'm like, do you actually work? Do
Right.
you do anything except for try to sell people on your bullshit $199 three payment masterclass? Like, really?
100%. Yes.
Those people and that hustle culture in general, this is what I think is so hilarious about hustle culture. Because I subscribed to it for a long time, right?
Mhm.
And I was in the military for 7 years, so like my body does not let me sleep in past 7 most days,
Yep, that'll do it.
so I was so used to waking up to reveille that my body is just like 7 o'clock comes, and as soon as sunlight hits my eyelids, it's like good morning. I'm like, fuck, I want to sleep in. um but I used to think that I needed to work until 1 o'clock in the morning to be
Mhm.
an entrepreneur. And then I realized, no, I need to go to bed at 9 o'clock at night because my body is going to wake me up tomorrow, regardless of whether I like it or not, before 7 a.m. And
Exactly.
that was a big shift inside of my mind. And, you talked about the transparency of the 15 hours a week and 7 figures. I think that you deserve more credence as an entrepreneur if you can figure out how to pull that off and be that efficient and be that audacious and that
Yeah.
balanced oriented than to be an entrepreneur that works 100 hours a week making the same amount of money. It takes a
Yeah.
lot more talent, expertise, and vision to work 15 to 30 hours a week and pull 7 figures in.
Oh, absolutely.
Those I think are the true kind of that true version of entrepreneurship. And when we were in Indie Collective, we talked about the 3 L's, that lifestyle, the loving and the living. And
Yes.
those are extremely important things. Why don't we talk about that for a little bit? When you first heard those 3 terms and really started diving into those, what was that like for you?
That was, I mean, a huge turning point in my entrepreneurial journey for sure. And I'll say too, when we talk about entrepreneurship and kind of the level that we're at is also kind of intertwined with this independent work
Mm,
lifestyle. And so to an extent, we have small teams, but to an extent, you are your business.
right.
And so, that is another thing that I always come back to to say that, whenever I am doing a yoga class or out to lunch with friends, like, I used to say to myself, this is not impacting the business, like, this is time off. But in reality, when you are your business and you're engaging in this independent work, every minute of the day is in some way related to your business. Because I got lunch with that friend, that's a networking opportunity, or that's just an opportunity for me to like turn my brain in a different direction and get more
Mm,
creativity. Every time I, take a yoga class, take time for myself, like that's allowing bigger things to happen in my business long term. So that was also like a huge mind shift that came to me in that, you know, big things don't happen for my business when I'm sitting at my desk.
yep.
Big things happen when I'm out in the world experiencing and learning and interacting.
Yeah. Amen. I like when it comes to you said something earlier that kind of hit home in my head, and I was trying to figure out how to articulate it, but I think it just hit me. That inside of that hustle culture, it's determined that you have to love every piece of your business, your life. You're working 24/7, and this was messed up in my head for a long time because I thought that my work had to be Excel sheets. It had to be filing my state, LLC license. It had to be nitty gritty, just stuff I hated doing. I'm like, well, this is what business is. So I guess this is what I signed up for, whoop de doo. Um,
Yeah.
and what I ended up realizing, to your point, is my job, if I were to look at it, because I have a team of 6 now that I'm leading, and I'm kind of like, a, I'm not using the word agency. I own a creative consulting firm. Like, I'm not using the word agency. I will never use the word agency. That's just like banned from our
Yes.
culture. Right. So I have a creative consulting firm and we have 6 people now. And my job as CEO is really to provide vision. Right. Which means that if I'm constantly doing medial tasks, I don't get a chance to disconnect. So me going to the park to watch a sunset is me working on my business, because me
100%.
being able to unplug and allowing my subconscious mind to put together puzzle pieces and see patterns and dream big, but then reverse engineer the path to achieve the dream. That's where being an independent to being an entrepreneur, I think they overlook that. They think that they have to constantly be iterating, and that's not the case. Sometimes the best thing that you can do to work on your business is take a yoga class
Mhm.
by far.
100%. Oh, yeah.
And you get to that place when things start to get silent, that when it first started happening, like I would almost get anxiety, right? And then I realized it's because I was addicted to my freaking phone.
Mhm.
I started to get anxious because I wasn't checking things in, I wasn't looking at other people, I wasn't consuming, right? And I'm a firm believer that you can only ever do one thing at a time. You're either actively consuming or you're actively producing, right?
I like that.
So if you're in a state of consumption, your brain is literally wiring itself to process the information coming in. There's different
Yep.
pathways in your brain, right? So like you're now using your eyes to focus on something, and it's very left brain oriented, right? We are directing our perception at something, and we're trying to grab a hold of it and understand it and see all the inner workings, and that's very much the left hemisphere of our brain functioning.
Mhm.
Where a lot of dreams, creativity, a lot of pattern detection, understanding where we fit in the universe, like all of those functions are right brain, and that's not happening when we're hyper focused on consuming other people's content. We have to
Yes.
disconnect. And I want people to understand that feeling of anxiety that you get, that's your almost like your creativity trying to manifest itself.
Oh, I love that.
And if you pay attention to it and give yourself, all it takes is like 8 to 10 minutes of you fighting through that anxiety, and then your
Mhm.
brain will start to actually release more chemicals to help you be creative. But that initial 6 to 8 minutes, it's flooding yourself with hormones, because we don't like doing that. Our brains are
Mhm.
wired to protect ourselves, so they want to pay attention to things. It wants to protect you from the bear that's in the woods that you should be paying attention to. And so if you allow yourself to fight through that for like 10 minutes plus, just set your phone down, get away from it, focus on a piece of paper. You might not write anything down for the first 10 minutes, or it might be a couple of scratch words or anything like that. But I'm curious what your experience has been like after a little bit, then you start to almost get into this flow state. And then it's like 2 hours goes by and you've, written 20 emails and you've done some other stuff and you're like, what just happened?
Yes. I call that, like, the entrepreneur high. It's, like, the best feeling ever when
Mm,
you're, like, in the zone and, like, things are just clicking, and sometimes you're working on your business, sometimes you're working on client work, but, like, the world around you just doesn't exist, and
mm-hmm.
it's this, like, high that we're, like, always chasing and trying to figure out, like, how to optimize around it. Like, that was so awesome, that was so productive, like, how do I get more of that? How do
Mm,
I get more of those days?
mm-hmm.
And exactly like what you're talking about, when you're doing these, like, meaningless tasks that you don't love, when you are working insane hours and you're filled with burnout, like, those moments, quite frankly, aren't happening for you.
Yeah.
That's when work becomes anxiety and that's when things get overwhelming. But when you're able to optimize, again, building this team, like, I think this just, like, so beautifully ties with everything that we've been talking about around knowing your weaknesses, building a team that supports you in those so that you can focus on your strengths. And exactly to your point around whether you're producing or consuming, like, I think that so beautifully comes back to our conversation around relationship building and how I
Mm.
was saying I spend a month with my clients just consuming. Tell me everything about your business so that I can properly then produce for them whenever it is my time to do so.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. I'm writing that down as another clip too. 36 minutes and 59 seconds. Look at that. Um, yeah, that's really interesting because it's almost, I feel like part of my anxiety, and this is going to kind of dive into, I want to make sure that we hit this point too, because I think it's super, super important about like the overcoming the being young equals being inexperienced stereotype. Right.
Yes.
So that's the one that we'll hit next. And I'll kind of preface it with this. It's like, when I first started out, I was so anxious about immediately producing for people.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, they just paid me a check. Like, I remember when I got my first retainer check and I almost crapped myself. I was like, oh my God, okay, like this is legit now. Like, I have to deliver for this business. This is like, they were a business in California. It was a biotech company called, at the time, it was Distributed Bio. Now it's called Centivax. Like,
Mhm.
I was like, oh my God, this is real. Okay, now I just have to start producing. And I let that anxiety like take me over. Right. And then now, like fast forward a year and a half post Indie Collective, I
Mhm.
just pitched this solar company. I said, yeah, we're going to have to take like 3 weeks to get to know you. And they were ecstatic about that.
Totally.
Right. And it's like getting over the anxiety of feeling as if you need to overproduce in the beginning is exponentially valuable because it allows you to get into a space of consumption, which then gives you the raw tools. And when I say tools, I mean knowledge, right? The raw tools with which to be creative when you enter the production phase. So it's like picture trying to build a house with no concrete. Like you have the
You
foundations
can't.
there, you have all the machines, you have everything else, but you never took any time to find good concrete. You're never going to be able to start. Or you might
Right.
build the house and it's just going to fall. But if you take that little bit of time to say, hey, like what kind of gravel should we use? What type of water mixture should we put into this? How long should we spin it before we pour it? And then
Yep.
ask all of these questions and really get to know them. Like, what do you want the basement to look like? How do you want this to flow? Where do you want this all go? What do you want the sidewalk to look like? And really map that all out and then start building the house. It's a completely different home.
Totally. And it's a completely different experience for the customer.
Right. Right. I remember the first time I take a blank whiteboard with me to consults and I just sit down with the client and I hand them a marker and I'm like, all right, let's do this. Like we're gonna,
That's awesome.
work through this together. Because there's something about the whiteboard that just like is inviting. It's blank. There's no wrong
Mhm.
answers. I just want to know what your gut has been telling you. Because there's a reason why I'm here. I always tell them this. Like, there's a reason why you called me. Your gut is telling you something. Let's try to figure out what that is.
Yep.
Because you know your business. I will never claim to know your business better than you do. You know,
Totally.
you've built this and you know things, you see things, you detect patterns, you understand what's going on. I'm just a technical guy. I'm just the guy
Mhm.
with the computer and I know a little bit about data. So like let's sit down and really try to explore this. And to your point, that is fundamentally a different experience for the customer than me coming in and saying, "Hey, I think you should run Google ads."
Yes.
Totally different.
Exactly. Yes.
So when you were, when is like the first time you really encountered that whole feeling of or being young equals being inexperienced? Was it in college? Was it in your first job? Did it leak into your independent career? Let's talk about that for a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. So, I think it even goes before that to say, like, and I know you and I have kind of talked about this offline, but like always being that kid where people would always be like, you're so mature for your age,
Oh
like
yeah, I
sitting
totally
at
forgot
like,
about that combo.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
like sitting at like the parents'
Yeah,
table and
yeah.
like having these like conversations and like always kind of knew like I was a little bit different in that
So you
sense.
had like a kids table during Thanksgiving and stuff too? Sounds like,
Yes,
yeah. And then we were
of course,
always at
yes.
the adults table. I always felt like I was being dragged over there to have conversations with my like 70-year-old aunt about random things.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So even from like an early age, before the whole like inexperienced piece hit, I was always like, something's off, something's weird from like an age standpoint. The term like old soul always would get thrown around. And then, like, whenever I got into college, freshman year, like, I was like, I got to start interning. Like, again, just like being that like sponge of a human,
Mm,
being like, I need to get as much out of this experience as I can. So, I walked into an internship my freshman year. And again, like everybody just kept saying to me, like, we're amazed that you're 18 years old. Like, and it was always this like caveat, like, you're so great, especially considering that you're 18. Or like I even have like recommendations on my LinkedIn that I like cringe at because it'll be like, Jazz completely transformed our marketing strategy, which was awesome given that she was a sophomore in college. And I just like, I'm like, why is that relevant? And so it was always this thing that like kind of like killed me inside. And I was like, how do I get rid of those caveats?
mm,
And I remember talking to one of my mentors about this and being like, we would have like these regular meetings. She was like my performance manager at my first job out of college. And she would be like, what are your goals? And I was like, one of my goals is for people to stop saying like based on your age whenever they compliment me. And she was like, wow, like that's fascinating. And we dug into it. And I got to this point where I like completely erased my age from the internet. Like I took like my graduation year off of all of my social media. I started changing like my internships, like my job titles to just say like everything before the word intern, like
mm.
social media, remove intern. And I like got like crazy about it. Like I would start like like I would wear clothes that I'm like my mom would wear this. Like I was like it was like getting weird, but it worked to an extent. Like it
I'm
honestly,
like
then
picturing you at Kohl's, like, I really want that, but my mom would wear this.
yes, yes. And like I was like, all right, like put the blazer on, like,
Yeah.
like do your hair in a certain way. Like it was just crazy.
Jeez.
And then the other piece of this too was I started having conversations with other women and they would tell me like very similar things. Like I remember this one woman saying to me, like, I was amazed at how my boardroom conversations changed whenever I got a ring on my finger, like an engagement ring. She was like, the tone completely switched. And it's just like crazy, but true. And
It's always like
so,
I'm so grateful that I was a nurse and like I got to
yes.
hear like a lot of these stories and be around a bunch of like powerful alpha females that are just like absolute ballers because I talked to some guys about this kind of stuff and they're like, "Oh my god, like I can't believe that that's a thing." I'm like, "Dude, it is totally a thing, like everywhere, all the time." And like even like you talking about the engagement ring thing. I remember a conversation like that in nursing where like the way that the
Mhm.
physicians would interact with some of the female nurses would completely shift when they got engaged. I'm like, "Why is that?"
I don't
That's
know.
just
It's
like
absolutely mind
yeah,
blowing.
something that I am like absolutely mind boggled that women have to deal with.
Yes. But all of this to say that part of it was internal, but part of it was external.
Mm,
So it was like this interesting thing where, that's the thing about like self-awareness and these stereotypes is there's a piece of it where you have to internally make peace with it. I had to internally say to myself like you are valuable, you have experience despite your age.
mm,
But then externally, I also had to project like not telling anybody how old I was. I remember I had a relationship with this I was freelancing for this agency for a while, and they were about to bring on this woman that I knew, and she was only a year younger than me, very similar trajectory. And I remember them saying, hey, we really want to bring her on and we want her to be client facing, but we're worried because she's so young. And I remember saying to them, well, I'm young too. And they said to me, really? They were like, how old are you? And I was like, doesn't matter. Like, I wouldn't tell them because I saw how it shifted their view of someone else.
mm,
And I didn't want that to happen to me.
mm.
So it's this delicate balance of the internal and the external piece.
Yeah, I'm trying to think like, there's specific things that y'all, and I say y'all as in like females, have to deal with in the workplace. That's just a completely separate can of worms that we'll have to,
Oh, yes.
maybe open on a separate date. Um, but I'm trying to think like between the military, nursing, and everything else, I don't. I feel like I've always gotten the wow, I can't believe you're X age, but I
Hmm.
never really got to that place where I felt like I needed to hide it. Like I almost did the opposite. I showcased it.
Mm,
And so I
that's
was
cool.
like, because I was able to achieve X by 23, you should bring me onto your team because it means that you'll be able to use me for a longer period of time.
I like that.
It's like, hey, I'm 23 years old and I was able to figure out X, Y, and Z. And like, I'll never forget my nursing job at Altman Hospital. Um, there's a career path called ICU resource nurse. And you
Hmm.
come in and you basically like your job is to be the oh shit that just happened nurse. And it's like I would get a call half an hour before my shift and they would tell me which unit is the most on fire. And like that's where I was supposed to go, is like to try to help
Wow.
relieve staffing, you know. But they wouldn't allow new grads into that position. They were adamant about the fact that you needed 2 years of ICU experience in order to access that
Mm.
position. So here I am, 22, wanting to commission in the Air Force at the time, which, that
Wow.
didn't happen. I'm a business owner at this point, but I wanted to commission in the Air Force. And I knew in order to commission that I needed to be competitive with all of these other nurses that would have, 5 years of experience in the cardiac ICU and all this other stuff. And so logically, the thing that I was like, well, if I can't beat them on length of experience, I can beat them on breadth of experience. And so I was like, this job
Mm.
would be perfect because I would get certified on 3 ICUs plus trauma in the ER. And I was able to achieve all of that in under a year and a half. But when I went into my interview, I basically went in with a pitch deck about why new grad nurses are more primed for learning, why having a younger person that you can mentor into a position would decrease churn rate because they would actually be trained to be that type of nurse rather than trying to take a nurse that's a little bit older with already established habits and a network of friends on a unit and push them into a position that requires them to be flexible. And like basically kind of outlined, hey, here are all the advantages because I'm young. And this is
Yes.
why you want me here. And it was definitely a difficult uphill battle because
Hmm.
regardless of how well you present it for whatever reason, um, it's still difficult for them to understand. And what I think, and I'm curious about what your thought process is on this last point. I think that the internet has fundamentally altered how quickly somebody can gain knowledge and experience because of the fact that, I mean, even when I was starting Apex, I've never taken a business class in my life, but I've watched a shitload of YouTube
Yes.
and read a ton of Medium articles and read a ton of books. And the internet allowed me at a young age to have access to education that previously was not available at that age. It was only available
Yes.
through universities, it was only available through grad schools, So I don't fault some of the older generation for believing that experience is linked to age. But this is also a call to action to those individuals to say, to understand that, especially these Gen Zs that are coming up, that have had access to
Mhm.
the internet all the way through. Because like I'm the last year, 95 is the pivot year for Gen Zs
Yeah.
and millennials. So I get to claim that I'm kind of a hybrid, right, of like millennial Gen Z. But like these Gen Zs that are coming up are just ballers. Like, all you
Yes.
really need to do is like show them that they're valuable, point them in a direction. And like my little brother is 19 and runs a lot of our content and our leads acquisition, and he's an animal. Like, I give him like, hey, I need 200 leads in this arena. 24 hours later,
Yes.
he's so savvy with research and learning and understanding systems, especially when it comes to the internet, that it's a beautiful thing to watch. So I like would argue that at this point, a lot of youthful people, they may be able to gain experience more quickly if the older generation is willing to point them in a direction
You are spot on. 100%, yes.
and work with them. So yeah, I
And I think it's so interesting. I think we're coming from a very we approached things in opposite ways, but it comes from the same internal place where we knew that we had to externally present in a certain way to
mm-hmm,
overcome our age.
mm-hmm,
And so I took that as make myself look older, and you took that as, make the younger generation seem more valuable.
mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, we were solving the same
And
issue.
that's why I wanted to bring up my alternate side, because I'm like,
Yes,
there's multiple ways to solve this problem, and I don't even know if it's a
absolutely.
problem so much as it is just every single generation encounters these generational shifts. If we were to say that the people in the Renaissance weren't like, wow, like Michelangelo is batshit crazy. What is that dude doing? You know what I mean? Like, for sure he was getting that type of kickback. Like
Absolutely.
Copernicus was like crucified basically by the Catholic Church for claiming that the sun, like, or that the earth wasn't the center of the universe. Like they're change agents, but
Yes.
they had to overcome this stigma that the older generation, the people that are less neuroplastic, they're less, they're kind of more set in their ways because they work. There's a reason why they got there. I always try to remind younger people there is a reason why that person is in that position, regardless of whether you believe they're executing it well or not. And that's something that I really learned in the military. It's like, you don't disrespect a chief master sergeant. I don't care how off the chain you think he is. He's been on 17 deployments and he knows more about that aircraft than you can dream about for the next couple of decades. So
Wow.
maybe you ask him for a little bit of mentorship and ask a couple of questions, and then you can kind of implant your ideas in the conversation and be like, well, I know I don't know a whole lot about this yet, but what if we did this? And then make it seem like it was kind of their idea to implement it. And as long as the team wins, you win, you
Yes.
know?
And I think you hit on such an important point there at the end, which is the piece about mentorship.
Mm,
And we've talked so much about building your tribe of people who are similar to you, but then there's also this piece of building your tribe of people who are above you and who have been where you have been, and
and are
having
where you want to
again.
go.
Yes, yes, and having those vulnerable conversations with them. And, I always say to people, imagine somebody came to you and said, "Hi, will you mentor me?" 100% I would say yes. Like, what a huge honor. Like, me? You want me to mentor
Yeah.
you? And I just
I just
feel
did that to myself the other day. I was like, me?
Yes, and I just feel like so many people are afraid to reach out and to say like, "Hey, I would love to have a conversation with you. Hey, I would love for you to be my mentor." But if you flip that script and put yourself in the other person's shoes,
Mm,
100% the answer is yes.
mm.
Like, people want to give back, people want to help, people want to feel important and like they know things.
Yeah.
And so finding a mentor, finding 18 mentors is so important.
And mentors that are willing to disagree with you and tell you you're wrong.
Mm. I love that.
If I was just talking to somebody about this the other day, because I have like 3 mentors that I try to talk to on at least a biweekly basis, right? One of which is a massive pain in my ass. I love you, Steve. But he always holds me accountable to things, right? Like, we were just on our phone call this month and he was like, hey, okay, so what was your revenue last month? And I told him, and then he was like, what was your profitability? And I was like, I'd have to check. And he's like, know your numbers. inside and out.
That's
He was
great.
like, do
I love
not
that.
go a single month without going back and calculating your profitability. And then kind of gave me that little bit of a verbal like on the phone.
Right.
Right. And then I went back and looked at it and I was like, man, we need to make some adjustments, you know?
Yep.
But having that mentor is just as useful as having the mentor that is just like, you're the best, like keep going, you got this. Um, and one like another piece like with the whole the age, and going above your age
Yeah.
and finding mentors that, like you said, are going to help you go where you want to go and are currently where you want to get to. um
Yes.
they the majority of my mentors are like 50 plus, right? And there's this
Mhm.
interesting thing in the psychology of human development across the lifespan where you go through these stages, right? And so Erickson is a psychologist and he has these stages where, when you reach that 50, 60, 70-year old range, it's actually called generativity versus stagnation. And so what
Mm.
happens is when you get to that age, mentally, physically, all of this stuff, you want to mentor people. You want to generate more knowledge. You want to create a legacy. And I don't think a lot of young people understand that that's where like these baby boomers that they're shitting on, that's where they are in their lives. They want to give you advice. They want to help. They want to create a legacy because the opposing side of that psychological tier is stagnation, which leads to a sense of loneliness. It's a sense of inadequacy. It's a sense of not being, and that's what makes people bitter. The amount
Mhm.
of times that I've been able to start a conversation off with somebody that other people are like, wow, that guy's a bastard. Like, you're never going to be able to talk to him. He's so stone faced all the time. Would just be like, hey, I need some advice. Would you be willing to have coffee?
That's great.
100% of the time. Well,
Oh,
maybe
yes,
90% of the
you're so
time,
right.
they're willing to
Right.
come in because there's are those 10% that are just dicks.
There's always
There's
one.
always
Yeah.
1 out of 10 that's just like, nah, maybe it's better that we left that one unchecked anyway. But the majority of the time, they're willing to sit down because that's where they are in life. They want to be able to pass
Yes.
on. And understanding that is not only giving you the gift of knowledge, but giving them the gift of feeling fulfilled in their life, which is so important.
Yes. That's fascinating. I feel like I've experienced that, but I love how you put it into scientific terms.
I'm a nerd. I just read a ton of
I know.
papers.
I love
Yeah.
it. Yeah. It's great.
I man, there are so many nuggets inside of this. Like this was like
Yeah.
phenomenal flow all the way through. Just from
Yes.
the self awareness pieces, understanding the stereotypes. I mean, we even worked in Eric's life stages. There's so many cool things. I want to know a little bit more about like what you're doing now in Houston and where people can find you. And really what you're passionate about now and how we can kind of help promote that.
Absolutely, yes. So my business is called Jasz Rae Digital. Super easy. My name is Jasz Rae. And me and my team and I, we help service-based businesses grow. And a lot of what we've been speaking about today, I really love to frame it as we help businesses grow. Yes, we do marketing. Yes, we do sales support, but let's meet, let's figure out what your business needs to hit those growth goals and then build a plan that truly supports
Mm,
that. And so that's what we're all about. Big into research, big into data driven decisions. We work primarily with founders and CEOs. I do a lot of personal branding because, like I mentioned today, you are your business.
hmm
So at the end of the day, if you're not putting yourself out there, if you're not becoming a thought leader, if you're not speaking and putting great things out into the world, then you can't expect great things to come back to you. So, do a lot of work with personal branding as well as branding and marketing for your business.
That's amazing. And so the website would just be jazzray.com, right?
Yes, that's
And then
correct.
that's JASZ Ray RAE.com for those of you. I'm so
Yes,
used to
thank
spelling my
you.
name because people will type it. They're like, I typed in Jan Almacy and it didn't come up. I'm like, well, send me a picture of what you typed in. It's like YAWN. And I'm like, no, no, you're so close.
Yes,
Phonetically,
I
you're
know. Thank you
correct.
for that.
Phonetically, you're correct, but you're a little bit off base. So, well, awesome, Jazz. I appreciate you coming on the show. I hope that,
Yes, I appreciate
this will
you.
not be the last time that we talk, I'm sure.
Yes,
And I'm
agreed.
looking forward to getting all the feedback and questions. So if you guys have any questions for Jasz, feel free to we'll make sure that we put her LinkedIn, link in the bio and in the video, or not the video, sorry, the show notes. It's been a long day. So we'll put all of her links in the show notes. If you want to reach out to her directly, I'm sure that she would be glad to have a conversation with any of y'all. If you do have some questions for her that you would like, maybe she comes on another show or anything like that, go ahead and shoot them to info@chasetheapex.com, or you can email me directly at Jan, looks like Jan, Jan, at chasetheapex.com. And until next time, I hope you all stay out there and keep kicking butt on a daily basis.